Hi everyone, Alon Lits here, the CEO of October Health. We're here for another episode of Pressure Point. Really excited to have Andisa Liba here today. She's from FloatPays, in an HR position, but doing so much more, which I think is a reality of every startup, and we're going to unpack that. Really honored to have Andisa join us. My colleague Alan's spoken to her directly before. She has a phenomenal name in the market more broadly, has been recognized as a 40 under 40, is part of the prestigious Inspiring 50 on the African continent, and many other prestigious awards and acknowledgement for her impact beyond her day-to-day. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And really excited for this conversation.
As am I.
Awesome. So maybe just to go back to the beginning, well, not right at the beginning, but a bit of context, a bit of background, so people know what have you done in the HR space, what have you done more broadly career-wise, and we'll go forward from there.
Amazing. So I've been the unorthodox HR person. I made the transition and pivot from PR, journalism, and marketing, and kind of eventually found my sweet spot with people management and people practices. And so, having worked actually in my earlier years as the youngest PA to Cyril Ramaphosa, who's our president, and then kind of moved through different large corporates such as Alexander Forbes, APSA, and a few others, until maybe 15 years ago or so, where I think the startup bug kind of bit me, and it's kind of stayed with me.
Okay, that's awesome. So yeah, I mean, that's super broad, right?
It's very broad.
I think not many people can say the things that you can career-wise, and I think that kind of holistic background, having done a lot of different things, makes you quite unique in the skill set that you bring to the table.
Yeah.
And I think what's critical about your ability, before we forget about you doing many other things beyond just an HR role, is that you understand business holistically. And you're not just coming at the problem with a certain lens.
Right.
So maybe just if you talk about yourself and your own career, how have you ensured that you do get that perspective and you can understand things, in a way that, your objectives meet the broader business objectives, you can align those, you can understand the broader business environment. Any tips or suggestions for listeners?
I love that question, because I think for people like me who are outliers, right, we kind of don't fit the traditional mold. And I think that for me has had far more benefits than anything else, because it's kind of really put me in this position where I can easily make the transition from just being a people practitioner to also wearing a commercial hat. And so if I look at my role right now at FloatPays, I started out as the head of HR. That evolved into kind of being the company spokesperson, to kind of building, the brand equity in the market with a lot of the work that I do across multiple platforms. I'm very, actively involved in the HR community at large. So whether it is a conference, it is a podcast, it is, a development program and anything in between, like, you're likely to find me there. And not because I want to stay busy or kind of stay, relevant per se. I find a great deal of joy in being able to unearth the magic in others. And it is such a responsibility and just something that is so unique. And it gives me a great deal of joy. And so I think it's allowed me to transcend through all of these different spaces. But I think ultimately, I think when you are easily adaptable, and I think if you are willing to tap into your other skill sets outside of what you're functionally hired to do, it is such an easy and organic, transition. And so for me, in the context of my current world right now, is I am a people person outside of being actual people person on paper. From an HR perspective, I enjoy engaging with people. I'm quite privileged in the fact that I work for an organization, I think, whose ethos is so tightly linked to my personal convictions. And for me, that is aligning myself to an organization or a platform that I think has a passion and lends itself to being a great economic accelerant for social and economic transformation which I think we so desperately need in the country. And so maybe this is, the person in me who just wants to do better for the world outside of that job. And so FloatPays kind of fills that void for me as a person. And so it's been such an easy sell, I think, to take the value proposition to the market, position it, have the language and the flair and the nuance. And that kind of lends itself to now, me also wearing a commercial head outside of the functional head.
Yeah, so there's so much over there, so much I want to unpack. I just want to double down on just that one little statement that you make. I think it's so powerful around helping people unlock the magic within them. I mean, like what a better mission, right? Like, I mean, that's amazing. I love that. And I mean, I think that's part of the reason why you are in the HR field, right? Is because like your care, your authenticity to help people be better. But I've never heard it, I guess, summed up so beautifully in such an impactful way. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you.
I think then, you've touched on it. You kind of wear this, HR hat within the organization, but organically, your role within the organization evolved. And I think that's part of the culture of the organization.
100%.
So I think there are two pieces there to share more broadly with our listeners. Is firstly, what is the culture like? And I think it kind of rings true for you, but it's a reality for a lot of startups.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start there, then we'll touch on your personal journey.
So I think the startup ecosystem organically requires an entrepreneurial spirit. So you get to be your own little mini entrepreneur within your own division. So, so in the absence of the red tape and I think and all of these other wonderful things that come with traditional corporate, you now all of a sudden have the autonomy to make certain decisions and certain judgment calls. Look, of course, you consult, I think with your fellow colleagues, but it does give you this beautiful creative canvas that you can kind of paint. And for me, a lot of that painting is drawing down on your strengths. So what are the stuff that you're good at? What are the stuff that brings you joy? What are the things you're not so good at? And so how do we extrapolate and create a body of work that speaks to your particular strengths against the backdrop of what the business needs? And so that always has to be taken into account. So it's great that, I mean, if you want to be an artist, like you could be to a degree, right? But like if we're not in that kind of like framework, then it doesn't work full time.
Yes.
And so for me, I think what I've enjoyed most about the startup environment is that it harnesses that entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so you get to really problem solve in a very unique way. And you're able to kind of put things on the table. You're able to go and source solutioning, whether internally, externally, and so it all of a sudden I think just unlocks this whole new world for I think one, to really tap into the things that they're good at. I think two, to really truly add value. And you don't often get that, I think, in traditional spaces, right? There's a certain expertise, there's a box that you need to kind of, stay in, because there's 1,000 other boxes. And so you don't really have the allowances to wear or to be in multiple boxes. You have to kind of stay in your box and shine in your box. And I find in the startup world, you can be anything, right? So you can really pivot. And in fact, I've seen so many people's careers transcend coming from a startup environment, because it really is that beautiful playground where you can kind of jump in between things and projects, leveraging your expertise and skill sets from other, organizations, but outside of the construct of what a traditional job role or job profile is. And so for me, what that looked like for me was that I'm a bit of a marketer, right? I can do podcasts like this. I can be on national radio, national television, right? Like these are things I love and I'm good at. Selling a product, I found it so easy because I 100% believe in its value and its impact. And so it was just such an easy transition and a pivot for me to make to now kind of being like this head of sales, which is also like really unorthodox. You don't get a lot of HR people who make that transition. Sure, if you can make the transition into a cool, right? That kind of often feels like that's a natural progression of the role. Although, I would even challenge that, because I think we've seen the last couple of years HR people moving into CEO roles, right? If any company to go by clicks locally, like we've seen that transition from the HR director to now being the current CEO. We've seen, I think, with Chanel, globally, their current CEO was the ex-HR director. And so I do also think that the profession is evolving far more rapidly than I think we give it credit for, in the rise of the new age C-suite execs, no longer coming from business functional lines, but I think also coming from the peripheral functions, such as HR. And so it's an exciting time, I think, to embrace where we are as a function, and I think the kind of value we add outside of the construct that is often governed by like legislative frameworks, if you will.
Yeah, so again, so much there. I think, the first is HR have got a real seat at the table, right?
100%.
100%, like they are critical to the success of a business, right? And because of that holistic understanding, which you're forced to have in that role, right? You can't do that job effectively without understanding what subject matter experts across the business are doing.
Yeah.
So you're almost forced to have this holistic understanding so you can assess performance, so you can understand political dynamic, so you can drive culture, which are all key ingredients for success within the organization. So, it makes a lot of sense that we're seeing this trend, just given how, one, pivotal, HR practitioners are within the business, and two, how skilled you have to be to actually effectively deliver what you need to do. On the other side of what you spoke about, I think, is that ambiguity of the startup environment, and needing people to come into that environment with the right mindset and ready for that. But maybe just to kind of pivot slightly where we're focusing, how do you hire for that? How do you know that this individual is ready? Because it's easy to say, ask the interview question, are you okay with ambiguity? And it's like, I love ambiguity, right? But a lot of people don't love ambiguity.
No.
Yeah.
I think there's very clear questions I think one has to ask and probe. And I think one of those, is that flair for having an entrepreneurial spirit. Like you ask questions like how much autonomy do you like? And, and the surface answer is, oh yes, I want lots of autonomy, right? But like, what does autonomy mean to you in your role? What does autonomy mean to you in relation to your colleagues? Because with autonomy also comes a great deal of responsibility, because you no longer have someone to absorb that impact when it happens, right? You actually have to do it yourself. And so in corporate structures, it's easy because there's a whole hierarchy. So by the time, the impact kind of hits you, like there's maybe 10 other people, it's kind of, the wave has kind of gone through, right? And so in a startup environment, it's just so important to ascertain, I think, people's appetite for risk. It's a very risky business. The metrics look fundamentally different. The sense of surety and security does not look the same. I'm not saying there isn't. Our company has been existing for 5 years, right? And it's still standing and will still be around for many more years to come. But the level of security looks fundamentally different than it would in a structured corporate.
Yes.
And so it's assessing people's risk appetite. It's assessing, I think, their need and passion for creativity. Is an important aspect, because what that tells you is that someone is willing and able to color outside the lines, which is often the ask. And so, when we lose people or people move on, et cetera, your willingness to pick up the slack and keep things moving without, I think, making it a mountain out of a molehill, as it were. And so a lot of that really just takes, people who are self-starters, people who are progressive in thought, people who aren't married to singular ideas, people who are open to multiple iterations of ideas and what their world would look like. And so my world looks different depending on projects that are on the go, depending on things that happen, depending on what the business needs. And so if the business tomorrow needs me to be the head of marketing and drive marketing initiatives, then that's what it is. I'll figure out after the fact, oh gosh, when are we going to hire the actual head of marketing? Yeah. But in the interim, right, like I've got to shoulder that responsibility. And so there is a lot of responsibility that comes with that much freedom. And so I think we've been very good at making it look easy and fun. I think for people on the outside looking in, but we do shoulder a lot of responsibility that comes with that level of autonomy. And so it's assessing, I think, people's appetite across those spectrums in terms of, how far are you willing to go in terms of overextending yourself, because that ask may be in a different cadence than what you're accustomed to in a traditional structure.
To get a bit out of your comfort zone.
Like almost all the time, right? And again, I think that's why understanding someone's risk profile, because that tells you a lot about when you throw them in the deep end, are they able to swim or sink?
Yeah.
And that kind of is the cycle and the wave of a startup, right? Like, there's phenomenal months where you're like, oh, we're shooting the lights out. And then there's months that are really, really tough, where we kind of need to have everyone anchored in and kind of, like going, okay, this is a mission, this is a thing. And it's super hard right now, right? Like this is so hard, but we can't give up, right? Because on the
grit and that resilience.
Exactly. So I love that word, grit, and that's exactly what it is, right? And it's not something you can teach someone, unfortunately, right? So it's either they inherently have it in them or they don't. And so for us, it's always important to ascertain, I think, what those are, and for me, what underpins that is people's personal values. So we can disagree about work all day because that often is from a philosophical perspective, that often is from a process perspective, that often is from just our perception of how to problem solve. But if our values aren't aligned, so never mind the work, like values is the one thing we just can't butt heads around, because that actually it becomes the deciding factor and the thing that probably would accelerate friction between individuals.
Yeah.
And so actually disagreeing about work is one thing, but like values is fundamentally important. And also because, the startup environment is so small. And that's why I think picking people who share common values is that much more important, because when the rubber hits the tar, I've got to have the confidence that I can 100% rely on you and you wouldn't let me down, not because it's me, but because our value of work is mutually shared.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it touches on what you said earlier as well around alignment to a mission, right? It's not just a job, it's a mission. And it's kind of cultivating that buy-in across the organization. Why do they believe in this mission that you're all on together? And I think that's so powerful.
It is.
So I want to go back to kind of your evolution within FloatPays, and I think you've shared you know kind of where this head of HR role, you're kind of the head of sales. How did that happen? Because I think it's a good example of kind of high agency, kind of an owner's mindset, and like thinking about the business holistically and ultimately driving value. All those kind of traits and examples that you shared previously, I think it's just such a great tangible story to share with everyone.
Yeah. So I think in my instance, it really happened organically, right? The business had gone through, a couple of iterations of changes, resource.
Which is also part of that.
Which is exactly, right?
That's the reality of startups. You've got to change, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah. So it's an environment where there's rapid change. And so in the midst of all that change, because of the work that I do, and I guess my prominence in the HR fraternity, I on very frequent occasion constantly have dialogue with other HR leaders about what their pressure points are, and I often kind of use that as a segue into the work that I do. And so an extension of that kind of became, I then started, and I guess I morphed and I had the sales funnel. So it wasn't planned by any means, but I think it's also a testament to the fact that in a startup environment, you really are, there's these allowances where you can do things outside of the box. And because I naturally enjoy, I'm a people's person from a functional HR perspective, I'm a people's person from a people's perspective. And so it was just such an easy transition for me to then kind of wear this commercial hat in terms of selling the product, in terms of engaging with other C-suite executives who by and large were decision makers in the deal brokering process. And so I don't think the opportunity would have maybe existed in more traditional spaces because, you've got teams of 20, 30 right, who are mandated to go and become biz dev and deal brokers. And the HR person kind of gets left to do what they hired to do. And that's the beauty, again, of a startup, is that natural growth and that acceleration of your career and of your learnings, it really, really is just so fast-tracked. And so in a very short space of time, I now had to learn actually how to be an actual salesperson. Which one, I think it challenged me. Two, I think it was a growth that I needed as a person. I love what I do, and I think also it makes it that much more easier. And I think to the point you alluded to, it for me it also ties back into just the common mission and goals and purpose. And so it's easy, I think, to move the goalposts when you are anchored by that.
Yes.
And so for me, whether I'm the head of marketing, the head of people, the head of sales, it's semantics. It's neither here nor there. What I am deeply married to is the end goal, and the end goal is that social impact, financial inclusion, and digital inclusion, and those are the drivers for me. And so it really kind of takes a different, I think, level of resilience to kind of look at your role and then also look at your impact. And so I'm less worried about a title and what I'm called on paper. Granted, I think when we go into market, the market kind of requires that, right? Like, oh, so like, what do you do? And, and I have to have an official title.
Yes.
But like back at the ranch, I'm like, what's my value? Like, what value does the business yield out of me?
It doesn't matter what your title
and
is.
it doesn't matter what my title is, but but the market like requires that. And so on paper, you have to kind of put something on paper. But my reality is that how many lives can we impact? How many lives can we change? Where are the points of inflection that are product influences that drive sustainable change? Like, that's the piece I'm interested in.
Yeah, so I think like speaking to you, it's probably like so obvious to hear that you're the perfect person to do this, right? Just because of your credibility in this space, your passion for the mission of the company, and your ability to connect with those decision makers who ultimately need the products. I think
Right.
it made sense. But to your point as well, if you weren't in an environment that allowed you to do that, which some corporates, I don't think, give people the flexibility that you can have in a startup, you would never have reached that point, or maybe would have taken a bit longer.
Yeah, I think I wanted to say also, maybe to dovetail to what you've just said, I think to give corporate a bit more credit, right? I think we are seeing the growth and evolution, I think, of mental models around what roles are and what functional titles
Yes.
are. And I think to give them a bit of credit on that is, I think there is that that transition. It obviously isn't happening at the same rapid pace as it would in a smaller environment, and perhaps that's the distinction. Yeah. And so I think in the more traditional spaces, when you have an army of people, you kind of have to really hold the line on certain things, whilst you slowly introduce and manage, I think, some of these pieces. But the beauty of a startup is that you can, in fact, I'm not the anomaly in my team. We've got, I think, 3 others who were hired as one thing, and now 2 years later, they're performing other roles and functions. And so it's not unique to me, but I think the message it communicates is that in the right environment, when you've got people who aren't risk averse, people who are open to learning opportunities and accelerating and fast track, learning and a jump start to their careers, like anything is possible. And so, it could be any one of us. In fact, I think even half my leadership team, like all our titles are different.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the point in corporate, it's a challenge to corporate, right?
100%.
Like, why not try to take on some of those positives, right? And have a culture within a larger organization that allows for a lot of what you've described. I think
100.
you can do that without bringing down the ship.
Yeah.
Right. It just needs to be adjusted to that corporate environment. I think another important point that you touch on, and just to make it explicit, is this mindset of continuous learning, which, you said you kind of pushed yourself to take on the sales role. I know from our own experience, like B2B sales is a bit of a, it's an art form. It's not a science.
Yeah, it's not a science at all.
So it's that kind of culture of continuous learning, which is clearly the case for you, but it sounds like it's broadly the case across the team. So how do you build that culture?
I think for us, we really encourage learning outside of the organization as well. In fact, my training ground actually became ex-colleagues of mine from 5 years ago when I transitioned into the role, and I would really lean onto them and say, how do you structure a deal? Like, how do you make the right follow-ups? How do you hunt? How do you farm? Right? And all of these concepts that, academically I know what they meant, but the reality when you carry a target, and empirical metrics, because again, sales it's a numbers business, right? And you measure success based on the numbers.
Yeah.
And so if someone is impactful or they're not. Like, the numbers don't lie. And so for us, we've encouraged a lot of that. There's a lot of cross-functional, learning pods, if you will. So different business functions would host, like a learning, power hour, if you will, or otherwise like a 30-minute of, hey guys, like this is, sort of what's happening in our world, and we kind of share ideas. We use a lot of collaboration tools to foster that as well, which is really, really important. So everyone kind of puts it on the table. Hey, I'm having a challenge with X, and anyone from anywhere, it could be like our most junior coordinator, right? I mean, we've had brilliant ideas come from, our junior resources who thought innovatively about something that I think the rest of us were like, like not quite sure. And then someone just kind of puts it on the table, and we'll take that on board, and we'll integrate that into the business, and we'll shift and we'll pivot accordingly. And so I think for us, it's not being shy about learning from each other. So I think we place a very high value and currency on peer-to-peer learning, on, I think, interdisciplinary learning. So across all of the teams, like, we always know what they're doing.
It's knowledge sharing, yeah.
So there's a constant, I think, ideology around knowledge sharing. But I know probably 90% of the team is really truly involved in their own disciplines outside of the organizations. People mentor, people are mentored, et cetera, et cetera. So
it's deliberate. I mean, it's not happening by accident.
No. It's not serendipity.
Yeah.
we definitely are very, very deliberate about it. In fact, we're right now walking that culture journey. I've started the culture journey with the team, and we're in that place of recalibration, right? A lot of the team have been around now for a little while. They're growing, some are outgrowing their current roles. So what does that mean from a team culture perspective? And how do we help those individuals to fast track what that learning is, but also how do we take everyone else on that journey with them? And so it's always kind of staying connected, because I think we've taken the view that teams that are high performing, have a high sense of belonging. I mean, it's a quote that Simon Sinek, always uses all the time. And we really, really subscribe to that. And so building that high sense of belonging, has been proven over time to yield high performance. And so it's constantly keeping those two verticals parallel, and making sure one doesn't completely outrun the other.
Makes sense. 2 points that I want to make in closing. I think the one was just that like little anecdote that you shared about kind of leading on ex-colleagues and the importance of relationship,
Yes.
right? And fostering relationship, and how important those relationships that you build up. And because people 5 years ago loved working with you, they're very happy to meet you for a coffee and share some tips. But if you didn't have a good relationship with those individuals, then they wouldn't be so open to it. And I think it's often something which people don't think about when they're thinking about their careers. And ultimately, you're more impactful in your role today because of this network that you built. And it's not a network that's come because you're great at cold calling. It's a network that you built up over your career because every interaction, no matter who it's with, matters. And you can see that you're able to build that connection with people.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why, and it's a bit of a different point, but I think it's an important point to maybe conclude on, is your ability to tell a story, the art of storytelling. And, it's something which, speaking to you, whether it's in this environment or in a casual interaction, comes through so strongly. So how do you cultivate that? Like, what do you do to kind of tell a story that, sells who you are, what the organization's doing? And I think it's important for people to think about that both in their personal lives and in their professional lives.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, like that's such an important thing. I think, to crack the code on.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, I mean, I think there's so much power in relational currency. 80% of my commercial deals come from referrals. It's people I've worked with, it's people that I know, to people that I know, to people that I know. And so there's so much power in that. The art of storytelling is so important. I think it's important to know what you know and know what you don't know. There's many opportunities I've turned down and I'll refer somebody else. There's many platforms I've been invited to and I'll say, I don't think I'll do it justice, but I think Alon actually could do a better job. And there's wisdom in that, right? In not being everywhere and not wanting, to be popular, as it were. But I think, part of me building that relational intelligence is because of how I handle people, and I think the integrity in which I move with conversations and platforms. But I think to go back to storytelling, I think know what you know what you don't know. I think learn from your mistakes, be vulnerable when it's required, right? Like we don't know everything. Before we were all masters of something, we were beginners of something. I think own that piece. I talk a lot about the stuff that I failed at, and I failed at royally, and I failed it royally, and it was terrible. But the wisdom gained from those mistakes has cultivated the person that I am today, and that is why I own those with so much passion. But I also think also knowing what not to say. I think in the world we live in, where we're overstimulated and there's information hitting us at every millisecond of the day, I think your ability to have the wisdom to filter out things is equally important. And I know we listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff, and we always want to quote the next person because we all want to sound cool and edgy.
I'm going to quote you though.
I'm okay with that. But I just think it's important, I think, to tell your story from a very earnest place.
Yeah, it's authenticity.
With authenticity, yeah. And I think, don't try to compete with the next person. I think your story has its own merits. Embrace the merit of that story wherever you are in that journey. That story is being written as you live through experiences. And so it doesn't have to be picture perfect. And so I know my story as, a young C-suite exec looks fundamentally different to the next person. And I'm okay with that, right? Because that's the journey I'm on right now. And I derive wisdom from where I am here and now. And that I'm okay with. And so I think just being authentic in who you are, embrace your strengths, learn from your mistakes, always put the mirror up, I think helps to keep you grounded and helps to keep you honest in your ability to tell that story from a very, very honest place.
Yeah. So it's humility and that authenticity that I think ultimately shines through.
100%.
Awesome. But that was great. I think we unpacked a huge amount in these last 30 minutes. I think everything from what to look for, whether it's a startup or a corporate, but people with high agency, the ability to be self-starters, embrace ambiguity, take on opportunity, and not just sit there waiting for things to be done for them, are critical ingredients. I think we spoke about this ability to continuously learn, push yourself outside of your comfort zone, take on risks, and do things that maybe you're a bit scared to do. The power of relationships, and ultimately I think ending off with the magic of storytelling. And again, if I'm going to end off, or maybe give you the ability to end off with a quote about helping everyone find the magic within themselves. I think no better way to end it off. So thanks so much, really loved it.
Thank you,
Andisa.
This is so much fun.
Awesome. Thank you.